There's a Gemara in Masechet Ketubot, Daf Samech Vav, Amud Aleph. It's an interesting Gemara. And to a Western mind, it seems to be very anti-woman. And I want to bring this as an illustration of how, because we think based on Western categories, we can't fully understand the true Jewish attitude. So actually, let's go back to the Mishnah here. There's a Mishnah that deals with property ownership by a married woman, what she owns and what the husband owns. And one of the rules in the Mishnah is boshta ufkama. What happens if the woman is publicly humiliated? She experiences boshet. So now she is entitled to money damages for the boshet. Let's say, for example, somebody takes off her head covering in public. That's very humiliating. So she would be entitled to money damages. Or pegam. Pegam is, let's say somebody injured her. And now, according to law, if a person gets injured, the individual committing the injury has to pay for the damages caused, the physical damages caused to the injured party. So what about in the case of a woman? How does that work? And the answer is, actually let me see if I can get this a little closer. And the answer is that the woman, according to the Tanakama in the Mishnah, the woman keeps that money, meaning if she gets a court verdict for boshet or for fegam, the money is hers. But then comes the opinion of the Biuda b'metera. The Biuda b'metera omer, bizman שבסתר לה שני חלקים ולא אחד, ובזמן שבגלוי לא שני חלקים ולה אחד. So he says that the husband keeps a portion of the damages in the case of boshet and pegam. So, again, a person reading this says, wow, that's very anti-woman. Why is that so? So now let's look at the Gemara. Matkif laha רבא ורב חנן, אלא מעתה ויש סוסתו של חברו, החנמה תבעה למיתן לבושת. So the Gemara asks a question. Let's say a person was riding a horse and comes another person and embarrasses the horse. I don't know what that means, to embarrass a horse exactly. Does that mean that he maybe slapped the horse in the face? Maybe he yelled at the horse? But okay, he embarrassed the horse. Let's put that on the side, what exactly that would entail. So the Gemara says, would the person riding the horse, the owner of the horse, be entitled to money damages for the humiliation that the horse underwent? So why then should a husband be entitled to money damages for the humiliation that his wife underwent? Well, the Gemara answers, or it doesn't answer, but it rejects the very question. It says, Vesus bar boshetu. Does a horse suffer humiliation? So we're saying the horse suffered humiliation, and now because the horse suffered humiliation, the owner of the horse should get a portion of that. I mean, the very question is absurd, because the horse didn't suffer any humiliation. Ella rakak bebigdo shel havero achiname teba'e lemitan leboshet. So let's look at a different situation. What about if a person was dressed in beautiful clothing and somebody else comes and spits at the clothing, right? Let's say he's wearing a long robe, and the robe, part of it goes to the ground, and he spits at it, right? Does he have to give him boshet? So the point here is that we're not, what's the point of the second question? We're not giving the boshet because of the humiliation suffered by the horse. We're giving the boshet because of the humiliation riding, the person riding the horse, meaning that would be the legal theory. So now we bring the situation of a person wearing clothing. Obviously we understand that the clothing doesn't suffer humiliation. Rather, it's the person wearing the clothing that suffers the humiliation. So now we understand the question of the Gemara a little more. The question is, let's understand, why does a husband get paid for the humiliation suffered by the wife? And the answer is, well, because he himself was humiliated, right? And it's for his humiliation that he should get paid, right? So when we asked a question about the horse, we weren't talking about the humiliation of the horse and what portion of the humiliation of the horse is damaged, should the owner of the horse get, but rather it's for the humiliation of the person riding the horse, that his horse was slapped in the face, or I don't know what ignominy the horse suffered, or the person riding the horse suffered. So anyway, continuing in the Gemara, Ve'hatenan rakak v'higia harok. One situation is a person spat as his friend, and the spit reached the friend. That's considered humiliation. Ufara rosha isha, a person takes off the woman's head covering in public, of course. Or if a person takes away his friend's talet from him and now he's exposed in public, he has to give him, he has to pay in this case for the humiliation. And Rav Papa said that that you only need to pay in the case of somebody who spits at his friend. One only needs to pay if the spit hits the body of the person. If it hits his clothing, he doesn't have to pay. So they say, let me find the place in the Gemara. Here it is. Bebigdo let leziluta ishto it laziluta. So the point is that you cannot say that a person deserves to receive damages for indirect humiliation. Meaning, from here we learn that if a person suffers humiliation directly, meaning the spit touches him, that's direct humiliation, then he would be entitled to damages. But if a person suffers indirect humiliation, meaning the spit touches his clothing and he's wearing these clothing, that's indirect humiliation, and for that there's no damages. Similarly, what do you want to tell me? You want to tell me that the person suffered humiliation because his wife was humiliated? But that's indirect humiliation, and for indirect humiliation, there should be no compensation. We learned that from the case of the clothing, right? So again, bebigdo let leziluta ishto it leziluta. So they say no, because when his wife was humiliated, he did suffer humiliation from that. It was a direct humiliation, meaning there's a difference between the clothing of a person and the wife. If my clothing gets stained, that's indirect humiliation. If my wife gets insulted, that's a direct humiliation of me. So I can suffer a direct humiliation vicariously through another person being humiliated. Okay? So now let's get to the final point. Amar le Rabbeina le Rav Asher ela me'ata bi yesh ani ben tovim de'it lehu ziluta lechulu bnei mishpacha hachaname deba'e limitan lehu boshet dekol bnei mishpacha. So the case in the Gemara is an unusual case. Let's say somebody embarrasses a poor person, right? Now, this poor person comes from a wealthy family. He comes from a good, noble family. And they embarrass this poor person. So according to the logic that says that if the husband is entitled for the humiliation suffered upon the wife, because that's actually direct humiliation, and therefore the husband is entitled to damages, according to that thinking, the family of this ani, the ani was insulted, the family suffers Just like the husband suffers for his wife's humiliation, the family suffers for the ani's humiliation, right? So the answer is, the problem is that that's not the case. The problem is that, in fact, in the case of the ani ben tovim, the family is not entitled to damages for boshet. So from here we see that one cannot make a claim for boshet, for damages for boshet, based upon the suffering caused upon someone, the boshet caused to somebody else. So the boshet caused to somebody else is not considered the direct boshet of anybody but that specific person. So in the case of the ani ben tovim, perhaps the family suffered humiliation, but that was indirect humiliation. In the case, therefore, if the husband and the wife, in the case of the wife being humiliated, the husband cannot claim that he was directly humiliated for the humiliation of his wife, because that's an indirect humiliation. And the final answer of the Gemara is no. Amale hatam lagufayu hacha ishto kufe havai. They say no. In the case of the ani ben tovim, indeed the humiliation of the ani cannot be attributed as a direct humiliation of the family, because he's a separate person. But in the case of a wife, the humiliation of the wife can be attributed to the husband, or we can say that the husband suffered that humiliation, but it's two separate people. The answer is no. Ishto kegufo. The wife of a person is like his own body. And therefore, it's not an indirect humiliation. It's actually one person. And therefore, the husband suffered. The Jewish ethos, which comes out of this, is quite beautiful, because it shows that the Jewish men really loved their wives, and they really felt one with their wives. And if a person saw that his wife was humiliated, that would be a direct pain caused upon that person. And even though normally one cannot be said to suffer boshet based on the boshet of another person, such as ani ben tovim, right? Because it's two separate people. But in the case of a Jewish husband and a Jewish wife, the pain and suffering of one is the pain and suffering of the other. I think that's a really beautiful ethos, and it's one that we should all understand and appreciate. As the pasuk says, "V'davak be'ishto v'hayu lebasar echad," right? They create this bond between them, and because of that bond, they're actually one person.